Sophia Harrington was a woman who seemed to have it all. She lived in a grand mansion with white pillars at the entrance, glass windows that reflected the morning sun, and gardens so neatly kept that they looked like something out of a magazine. She was not only wealthy, but also well-respected. People often spoke of her success in business, of her influence in social circles, and of the way she carried herself with such grace. But behind the perfect picture, Sophia's life was far more demanding than it appeared from the outside. She had recently become a mother, something she had dreamed of for years. Her baby boy, Daniel, was the light of her life. The moment she first held him in her arms, she promised herself that she would give him the best of everything. Yet, like many new mothers, Sophia also found herself struggling. Nights were long, filled with the baby's cries, and mornings came too quickly with meetings and phone calls waiting for her attention. She loved her child dearly, but she was exhausted, torn between her role as a mother and her role as a businesswoman. Her husband, Charles, was kind and supportive, but was often away on work trips. He provided love when he was home, but most of the responsibilities of caring for the baby fell on Sophia. To help with the house and with Daniel, Sophia decided to hire a maid. After interviewing many candidates, she chose Grace, a soft-spoken woman with calm eyes and a gentle way of speaking. Grace had recently moved to the city from a faraway country. She didn't talk much about herself, but Sophia noticed how quickly she adapted to the household tasks and how attentive she was to the baby. At first, Grace's presence felt like a blessing. She would quietly move through the house, cleaning, cooking, and helping with small tasks. Sophia began to feel some relief knowing that she had someone she could rely on. When Daniel cried, Grace would often rock him in her arms until he settled. Sophia was thankful for the extra pair of hands, even though she still carried the weight of being the baby's mother. But one evening, everything changed. Sophia had just returned home after a long meeting. The house was unusually quiet. Normally, Daniel's cries could be heard echoing through the halls at that hour, but tonight, silence greeted her. Curious and a little worried, she walked toward the nursery. The door was half open, and as she stepped closer, she heard soft humming. Sophia pushed the door open gently, and what she saw froze her in place. Grace was sitting in the rocking chair, holding Daniel close to her chest. The baby's tiny face was pressed against her, and Grace was nursing him as if he were her own child. For a moment, Sophia couldn't move. A rush of emotions hit her. All at once, shock, disbelief, and a wave of anger she couldn't put into words. She had trusted Grace to care for her child, but this was something she had never imagined. She took a step inside, her voice trembling as she called out, "Grace, what are you doing?" Grace's eyes widened in fear. She quickly pulled the blanket over the baby, her hands shaking. I'm sorry, ma'am," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He was crying so much. He wouldn't take the bottle, and I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't stand to see him in pain." Sophia's heart pounded. She wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, to ask how Grace could dare to do such a thing. Yet as she looked at her baby, peaceful and calm in Grace's arms, her anger clashed with confusion. Daniel looked content, his little hands resting against Grace as though he felt safe. Still, Sophia's mind was racing. How could Grace have done this without permission? What if it harmed the baby? What if people found out? She had worked so hard to build her reputation as a strong, capable woman, and now she was faced with a situation she couldn't understand. Grace's eyes filled with tears. She lowered her gaze and said softly, "Please forgive me. I should not have done it without asking. But I swear, I only wanted to comfort him. I have milk because—" Her voice trailed off and she hesitated, as though afraid to continue. Sophia crossed her arms, her tone firm. "Because what, Grace?" "Explain yourself." With trembling lips, Grace finally spoke. Because I lost my own baby not long ago. He was only a few weeks old when he passed away. My body, it still produces milk. When I heard Daniel crying, I couldn't stop myself. I thought of my child and I couldn't let him suffer. Her words filled the room with silence. Sophia felt a chill run through her body. She hadn't known this about Grace. She had never asked about her past, never wondered about the sadness hidden behind her quiet eyes. Now, hearing her confession, Sophia was torn. She wanted to feel angry, but instead something inside her softened. She looked at Grace, who sat there with tears streaming down her cheeks, holding the baby with such tenderness. For the first time, Sophia saw not just a maid, but a woman, a mother who had experienced loss so deep it still lived in her every breath. Yet Sophia was also deeply unsettled. She couldn't ignore what had just happened. This wasn't part of the agreement. Grace had crossed a line, and Sophia knew she had to decide what to do next. Should she fire her immediately? Should she tell Charles? Or should she try to understand the situation more fully? That night, Sophia barely slept. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the image of Grace nursing her baby. The picture wouldn't leave her. Daniel had looked so peaceful, yet the circumstances were so complicated. She felt a storm of emotions: anger, sympathy, confusion, and even guilt. The mansion, which usually felt like a symbol of her success, suddenly felt heavy and filled with questions. For the first time, Sophia wondered if she had built a life that looked perfect from the outside, but was missing something essential inside. She didn't know it yet, but this unexpected discovery was the beginning of a journey that would change her heart forever. The following morning, Sophia woke up with heavy eyes. She had barely slept, her thoughts circling around the scene she had witnessed the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Grace in that rocking chair, nursing her son as though he were her own. The memory unsettled her, and yet deep inside, she could not deny the calm look on little Daniel's face. It was a sight she had not seen in days. As she got out of bed, she reminded herself that she had to deal with this situation firmly. She could not allow boundaries to be crossed in her home. Yet, another voice inside her whispered that there was more to Grace's story than she knew. With mixed emotions, she made her way downstairs. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread and tea. Grace stood at the counter, preparing breakfast with her usual quiet focus. When she saw Sophia enter, she lowered her eyes and whispered, "Good morning, ma'am." Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the teapot on the table. Sophia studied her for a moment before replying, "Sit down, Grace. We need to talk." Grace's face paled. She wiped her hands nervously on her apron and hesitated before pulling out a chair. She sat on the edge, as if ready to jump up at any moment. Sophia sat across from her, her eyes sharp, but her voice calm. "What you did last night, do you realize how serious it was?" Grace clasped her hands together, her voice breaking as she said, "I know, ma'am. I crossed a line. I should never have done it without your permission. Please forgive me." Sophia leaned back, crossing her arms. "Then tell me why you did it. I don't want excuses, Grace. I want the truth." For a moment, silence filled the kitchen. Grace's eyes welled with tears. Her lips quivered as she struggled to find her words. Finally, she whispered, "Because I couldn't bear to hear him cry. He reminded me of my own baby. The sound, it broke my heart." Sophia tilted her head, confused. "Your own baby? You never told me you had a child." Grace took a deep breath, her hands tightening together. "I did. A little boy. He was born last year. His name was Samuel. He was the sweetest child, but he was fragile. We lived in a poor neighborhood. When he fell sick, I couldn't afford proper care. I tried everything I could, but one night, he slipped away in my arms." Her voice cracked and tears rolled down her cheeks. Sophia sat frozen, unsure of how to respond. She hadn't expected this. She had assumed Grace's life was simple, but here was a woman who carried wounds too deep to be seen on the surface. Grace wiped her face with the corner of her apron and continued, her voice heavy with grief. My body still makes milk, even though Samuel is gone. When I hear a baby cry, it feels like my heart is being torn apart. Last night, when Daniel wouldn't take the bottle, I remembered how my Samuel used to cry the same way. I couldn't stop myself, ma'am. I just wanted to comfort him, the way I couldn't comfort my own child. Sophia's chest tightened. She had been prepared to scold Grace, maybe even to dismiss her, but now she found herself struggling to hold back tears. She had never imagined the quiet maid in her home had carried such a tragedy. Still, Sophia's mind wrestled with uncertainty. She spoke firmly, though her voice trembled. Grace, you should have told me. You can't just make decisions like that. He is my son. Grace nodded quickly, shame written across her face. I know, ma'am. I understand if you want me to leave. I only ask one thing. Please don't hate me. I did it out of love, not disrespect. Sophia looked at her baby, asleep in the cradle, nearby. He seemed so peaceful, his little chest rising and falling gently. For the first time in weeks, he had slept soundly through the night. She knew it was because of Grace. And that realization left her torn. Her logical side told her that what Grace had done was unacceptable. But her heart, softened by the story of Samuel, felt a wave of compassion she hadn't expected. Here was a woman who had lost everything, yet still found the strength to give love to a child that was not her own. The day went on slowly. Sophia kept replaying Grace's words in her mind. She found herself watching the maid more closely, noticing things she hadn't before. The way Grace hummed soft lullabies while folding laundry, the tenderness with which she touched Daniel's blanket as if it were something precious, the distant look in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. Later that afternoon, Charles returned from his trip. Sophia considered telling him everything but hesitated. She wasn't sure how he would react, and she herself hadn't decided what to do yet. She simply told him she was tired and needed rest. Charles kissed her forehead, gently, unaware of the storm of emotions inside her. That evening, Sophia walked into the nursery once again. Grace was standing by the crib, watching Daniel sleep. She looked up nervously when Sophia entered, as though afraid she would be scolded again, but Sophia only said softly, "Tell me more about Samuel." Grace blinked in surprise. "About my son?" "Yes," Sophia replied, pulling up a chair. "I want to understand." Grace hesitated, but then began to speak. She told Sophia about her village, about the joy of holding her baby for the first time, about the laughter that filled her small home whenever Samuel smiled. She also spoke of the pain, the long nights when he struggled to breathe, the helplessness of knowing she couldn't afford a doctor, and the final night when he slipped away quietly. Tears fell down her cheeks as she spoke, but she did not stop. Sophia listened, her own heart aching with every word. For the first time, she saw Grace not just as an employee, but as a mother, a woman who had endured heartbreak that no one should ever have to face. When Grace finished, the room was silent, except for the soft sound of Daniel breathing. Sophia felt a lump in her throat. She reached out and placed her hand gently on Grace's. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I can't imagine your pain. But I want you to know I don't hate you. I just needed to understand." Grace's eyes widened in surprise, and for the first time a faint smile touched her lips. "Thank you, ma'am," she said softly. Sophia walked back to her room that night. She realized something inside her had shifted. She was still unsure of what to do about the situation, but she no longer saw Grace as just a maid. She saw her as a woman who had loved, lost, and yet still had love to give. And though she did not know it yet, this understanding was the first step toward a bond that would grow stronger than anything she could have imagined. Sophia could not stop thinking about Grace and the story of her lost child. Over the next few days, she found herself watching Grace closely, noticing the small ways she cared for Daniel. It was not just feeding or cleaning. Grace seemed to anticipate the baby's needs before anyone else. And she did it with a quiet dedication that left Sophia both amazed and unsettled. Curiosity began to grow inside Sophia. She realized that she knew very little about Grace's life before coming to work at the mansion. What kind of childhood had she had? How had she ended up so far from her home? And most importantly, what kind of woman was she beyond the walls of Sophia's carefully controlled household? One afternoon, after Daniel had fallen asleep, Sophia found Grace folding laundry in the sunlit kitchen. She watched her for a moment, then asked softly, "Grace, would you tell me more about your life? I mean, your real life before you came here?" Grace hesitated. She glanced at the baby monitor, then back at Sophia, her hands stilling over the soft folds of clothes. After a long pause, she nodded. "I suppose I can," she said quietly. Sophia pulled up a chair, signaling for Grace to sit. The maid lowered herself onto the edge of the chair, hands folded in her lap, and began to speak. "I come from a small village far away. Life there was very simple, but also very hard. My parents worked in the fields, and we never had much. But there was love, and there was laughter. My family always shared what little we had." Sophia listened intently, trying to picture the place in her mind. The opulence of her mansion could not compare to the modest homes of Grace's village, yet there was a sense of warmth in Grace's voice that made Sophia realize wealth was not the only measure of a full life. Grace continued. "I grew up helping my mother and father, learning to cook, clean, and take care of my younger siblings. When I was old enough, I moved to the city, hoping to find better work. I wanted to support my family, send money back home, and make life a little easier for them. But the city, it is not kind to people like me. Work is hard, and life can be lonely." Sophia's chest tightened as she listened. She had always assumed that everyone around her had opportunities like she did, but now she realized how sheltered her life had been. Grace's journey was one of courage, endurance, and constant struggle. Then Grace's voice grew softer, almost breaking. "And then I became a mother. I was so happy when my little boy, Samuel, was born. He was everything to me. But the world was not kind to him. He became sick, and I could not afford proper care. I tried everything. I prayed. I begged. I did all I could, but one night I lost him. I lost my baby, and there was nothing I could do. Not a thing." Tears filled Grace's eyes as she spoke, and Sophia felt a lump in her throat. She had never heard anyone speak with such honesty, such raw pain. For a moment, the world outside the kitchen, the city, the mansion, even her own stress and worry, felt distant and unimportant. All that mattered was the woman sitting in front of her, a woman who had endured heartbreak beyond what most could imagine. Sophia reached out and placed her hand gently over Grace's. "I am so sorry," she whispered. I cannot imagine what that must have been like." Grace looked up, her eyes meeting Sophia's. "It is a pain that never truly leaves. But it taught me something, too. Even when life is cruel, we can still give love. Even when we are broken, we can still care for someone else. That is why I could not let your baby cry. I could not bear it." Sophia felt a strange mix of emotions, sympathy, awe, and something new. Admiration. Here was a woman who had suffered so deeply, Yet her first instinct was to give love and comfort. She had every reason to be bitter, angry, or withdrawn, but instead, she chose kindness. For the next hour, Grace shared more stories about her village, her family, and her hopes for the future. She spoke of her dreams for her siblings, for children, in her community, and even for herself, though she had learned to keep those dreams small. She talked about her late husband, about how they had struggled together, and about the strength she found in small acts of care and compassion. Sophia listened silently, realizing that she had been wrong to judge Grace so quickly. She had seen only the surface, the act of nursing her baby without permission, but she had not seen the woman beneath. Grace was not just a maid. She was a mother, a survivor, and a person with depth, courage, and heart. After Grace finished speaking, there was a quiet moment between them. Daniel stirred in his crib, and Grace quickly moved to pick him up, humming softly as she cradled him. Sophia watched, feeling a warmth she had never felt before. The bond between Grace and Daniel was unmistakable, and it filled the room with a sense of peace. Later that evening, Sophia sat alone in her study, reflecting on the day. She realized how much she had misunderstood Grace. She had assumed that Grace's actions were impulsive or disrespectful, but now she saw them as the result of a life shaped by love, loss, and resilience. Sophia began to question her own life. She had wealth, comfort, and status, yet how often had she truly been moved by another person's pain? How often had she acted out of instinctive compassion rather than careful planning and self-interest? The days turned into a week, and Sophia's perspective continued to shift. She found herself checking on Grace in ways she had never done before, asking her opinions about Daniel, and even seeking her advice on small matters of child care. Grace's insights, born from experience and heart, were invaluable. Sophia realized that she had much to learn from her despite their differences in background and social standing. One afternoon, Sophia took a bold step. She invited Grace to sit with her in the garden, away from the noise and activity of the house. "Grace," she said, looking into her eyes, "I want to understand you better. I want to know who you really are, not just as someone who works here, but as a person. Will you tell me about your family?" Grace's face softened. She spoke of her parents, now elderly, living in a village far away. She spoke of her younger siblings, some of whom were still in school, others working in the fields to support the family. She spoke of her dreams to help her community, to give back in ways she never could have imagined when she was younger. As Grace spoke, Sophia felt something shifting deep inside her. She began to see a connection between their lives, fragile, though it might be. Both were mothers. Both had hopes and fears. Both wanted to protect their children and give them the best life possible. The differences in wealth and circumstance seemed less important now, replaced by the universality of love, loss, and resilience. By the end of the conversation, Sophia felt a deep respect for Grace. She understood that the woman had acted out of instinct, love, and a deep understanding of pain and comfort. Sophia realized that this was not a moment to punish or judge, but a moment to reflect, to grow, and to embrace the humanity in another person. And as the sun set over the mansion, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Sophia made a silent promise to herself. She would not rush to anger or judgment again. She would take the time to understand, to listen, and to act with empathy. Grace had taught her a lesson she would never forget, that the depth of a person's heart could not always be measured by circumstance, but by the courage to give love, even when life had taken everything else away. Sophia did not yet know what the future would hold, but she felt a quiet certainty that this newfound understanding would change her life forever. For the first time, she began to imagine a future in which Grace was more than an employee, someone she could trust, someone she could learn from, and perhaps even someone she could call family in a deeper sense than she had ever imagined. Over the next few days, something remarkable began to happen. Sophia noticed a change in herself that she hadn't expected. She had always been proud of her wealth, her achievements, and the control she maintained over her household. But watching Grace's care for Daniel stirred feelings she could not ignore. There was a warmth in the way Grace held the baby, a patience that Sophia herself struggled to summon, and a depth of understanding that went beyond instructions or schedules. One morning, as sunlight streamed into the nursery, Sophia paused in the doorway. Grace was gently rocking Daniel, humming a soft tune. The baby's tiny fingers curled around Grace's hand, and he looked completely at peace. Sophia felt a lump in her throat. She realized that this simple scene held more comfort and love than anything she could buy with money. For the first time, she saw that true care was not something that could be commanded. It had to come from the heart. Sophia stepped into the room quietly, afraid of disturbing the delicate moment. Grace looked up, startled, but then relaxed when she saw Sophia's gentle expression. Sophia said softly, "Grace, I want you to know something. I've been thinking a lot, and I want you to continue caring for Daniel in your way. I trust you." Grace's eyes widened in surprise. You really mean that, ma'am?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," Sophia replied. "I can see how much love you have. I can see that Daniel is calmer and happier when he is with you. I don't want to take that away from him, or from you." Grace's face softened, a mixture of relief and gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you, ma'am. I promise I will always do my best for him." From that moment, something shifted in the household. Sophia began to see Grace not as just an employee, but as someone who had earned her respect and trust. She began to include Grace in small decisions about Daniel, asking her advice on feeding schedules, sleeping routines, and ways to comfort him when he was fussy. Grace's wisdom, shaped by her own experiences as a mother, proved invaluable. Sophia realized that she had much to learn from this quiet, strong woman who had endured so much and still carried kindness in her heart. As the days passed, Sophia also noticed that her own perspective on life was changing. She began to question the things she had always valued, the endless pursuit of money, the obsession with appearances, and the constant need to control every aspect of her environment. Watching Grace, she saw the beauty in simplicity, in acts of love that were unplanned and instinctive. She began to understand that wealth and power could provide comfort, but they could not create the kind of connection that came from shared humanity. One afternoon, Sophia found herself sitting in the garden, watching Grace play gently with Daniel on a blanket spread across the grass. The baby laughed, reaching out to touch Grace's face, and Grace responded with a soft smile and gentle tickles. Sophia felt a warmth in her chest that she could not explain. She realized that Grace had not just calmed Daniel, she had also softened Sophia's heart. Curious to know more about Grace's life and dreams, Sophia decided to ask her a question she had not dared to ask before. "Grace," she began carefully, "what do you want for your life? For your family? I want to understand. Your dreams, the things that matter to you." Grace paused, a little surprised. Few people had ever asked her such a question, especially not someone like Sophia. She looked at the garden, at the baby laughing in the sunlight, and then back at Sophia. "I want to help my family," she said softly. "I want to make sure my parents are safe and comfortable. I want my siblings to have a better life than I did. And I want to help other mothers, especially those who are poor or struggling, so they don't have to face the pain I faced with Samuel." Sophia listened, deeply moved. Here was a woman who had suffered unimaginable loss, yet her dreams were filled with kindness and compassion. She was thinking not only of herself, but of her family, her community, and even strangers she had never met. Sophia realized that this was a kind of strength she had never truly appreciated before. Over the next weeks, Sophia and Grace spent more time together. Sophia would occasionally step away from her work to sit with Grace while she cared for Daniel. They talked about everything: childhood memories, hopes for the future, and small everyday joys. Sophia was learning to see life differently through Grace's eyes. She understood the depth of love, the courage it took to endure pain, and the beauty of small, selfless acts. One evening, after Daniel had fallen asleep, Sophia found Grace sitting quietly in the living room. She sat down beside her and said softly, "Grace, I want you to know something. You have taught me more than I can say. I thought I knew what love was, but watching you care for Daniel, I see it in a whole new way. You have changed me." Grace looked at Sophia, her eyes glistening. I am only doing what any mother would do," she said softly. "I never expected to teach anyone anything." Sophia shook her head gently. "You have, and I want to do more than just watch. I want to help you. I want to support your dreams, your family, and your goals. I don't know exactly how yet, but I want to try." For the first time, Grace felt something she had not felt in a long time: hope. Hope that her life could be more than endless struggle. Hope that someone cared not just for Daniel, but for her as a person. Hope that her dreams for her family might actually come true. Over time, the bond between Sophia and Grace grew stronger. They became more than employer and employee. They became allies, friends, and confidants. Sophia learned to listen, to value insight from a place she had never thought to consider, and to appreciate the strength that came from enduring life's hardships with Grace. Grace learned to trust, to allow someone else to care for her, and to accept kindness she had never known in a world that had often been harsh and unforgiving. As months passed, Sophia began to see a transformation not only in herself, but also in her household. Daniel thrived under Grace's care, his laughter filling the mansion with joy. Sophia noticed that she was calmer, more patient, and more aware of the world beyond her wealth and status. Grace's presence had become a source of peace, a reminder that love, compassion, and understanding were more valuable than anything money could buy. And in the quiet moments when Sophia watched Grace rocking Daniel or humming softly while folding laundry, she realized that this unexpected friendship was one of the most important relationships in her life. Grace had entered her home as a maid, but she had become something far more significant: a teacher, a guide, and a mirror showing Sophia the true meaning of love and humanity. Sophia also began to make small changes outside the house. She donated to causes that supported struggling mothers. She reached out to communities that needed aid, and she shared Grace's story with a few close friends. Each act reminded her that empathy and understanding could extend far beyond her home, and that the lessons she was learning were meant to be shared. By the time the first anniversary of Daniel's birth arrived, Sophia knew that life would never be the same. The events that had begun with shock and anger had blossomed into something extraordinary, a bond built on trust, shared experience, and deep human connection. She had learned that wealth was not measured by money alone, but by the capacity to love, to understand, and to act with kindness. And though she did not yet know what the future held, Sophia felt certain that Grace's presence in her life was a gift she would cherish forever. Grace had not only nurtured Daniel, but had also nurtured Sophia's heart, showing her that true transformation comes not from power or status, but from the courage to care, to forgive, and to embrace the humanity in another person. Months passed, and the bond between Sophia, Grace, and little Daniel grew stronger with each day. What had once been a situation filled with shock and confusion had transformed into something extraordinary. Sophia could no longer imagine her home without Grace. The quiet maid had become a trusted companion, a guide in motherhood, and, in many ways, a mirror reflecting the best parts of Sophia herself. Sophia often thought back to the day she had discovered Grace nursing Daniel. At first it had seemed like an unthinkable violation, a moment she could never forgive. But over time, she realized that it had been a turning point, a spark that had ignited understanding, compassion, and love in ways she could never have planned. Grace had shown her the value of instinctive care, the importance of empathy, and the power of selfless acts. One bright morning, as the sun spilled golden light across the mansion, Sophia approached Grace in the nursery. Daniel was playing on the floor with his toys, laughing and clapping his little hands. Grace's eyes lit up at the sight, and she smiled as she encouraged him. Sophia watched for a moment, feeling a warmth in her chest that words could not describe. "Grace," Sophia began softly, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About you, about your family, and about what you've done for Daniel. I want you to know something important. I don't want you to leave. You're not just a maid to me. You're family." Grace's eyes widened and her hands froze for a moment. "Family?" she whispered, almost in disbelief. "Yes," Sophia said, smiling gently. "I want you to be part of this family in every way. You've cared for my son with more love than I could have imagined. You've taught me lessons that no amount of wealth or success ever could. I want you to feel at home here, not just as an employee, but as someone we trust and love." Tears filled Grace's eyes, and she covered her face with her hands. I don't know what to say. I never dreamed." Her voice trembled with emotion. Sophia reached out and gently took Grace's hands in hers. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that you belong here. You have brought love, hope, and light into this home, and I will always be grateful." From that day forward, the dynamic in the mansion changed completely. Grace no longer moved quietly in the background. She was a respected and cherished member of the family. Sophia involved her in every aspect of Daniel's life, from bedtime routines to decisions about his education. They shared laughter, tears, and countless small moments that strengthened their bond. But Sophia didn't stop there. She knew that Grace's love and courage extended far beyond their home. She wanted to honor that, to give Grace the chance to make the difference she had always dreamed of. Sophia began to take steps to support Grace's family in her village. She arranged for resources to be sent to them: food, clothing, and basic medical supplies. She even helped establish a small clinic to provide care for mothers and children who lacked access to hospitals and doctors. Grace was overwhelmed with gratitude. She had worked so hard for her family, but she had never imagined that someone like Sophia would take her dreams seriously, let alone help make them a reality. Together, they wrote letters to Grace's siblings, sent supplies, and planned visits. Sophia saw firsthand the impact of Grace's love and resilience, and she was inspired to do even more. Back at the mansion, life continued in a joyful rhythm. Daniel thrived under their shared care, laughing and growing with the security of two devoted mothers. Sophia noticed how much she herself had grown. She was more patient, more empathetic, and more aware of the world outside her wealth and privilege. She had learned to value human connection over material success, and she found a new sense of purpose in helping others. One afternoon, Sophia invited Grace to sit with her in the garden. The warm sunlight filtered through the trees, and Daniel played nearby with his toys. "Grace," Sophia said, "I want to do something even bigger. I want to help other mothers, the way you wanted to help, and I want to do it with you. I can provide the resources, but your experience and insight are what will truly make a difference." Grace looked at her in awe. "Me? But I'm just me. I never thought I could help on such a scale." Sophia shook her head. "You are not just you. You are strong, wise, and compassionate. You've already made a difference in my home and in Daniel's life. Imagine what you could do for others who are struggling. Together, we can create something meaningful." The idea blossomed into reality. They began by organizing small programs in Grace's village, teaching mothers about childcare, nutrition, and basic health care. Sophia provided funding and resources, while Grace shared her knowledge, experience, and empathy. Slowly, the programs grew, helping hundreds of families who had once had no access to guidance or support. Meanwhile, the bond between Sophia and Grace deepened. They shared secrets, laughter, and moments of quiet reflection. Sophia learned to lean on Grace in ways she had never leaned on anyone before, and Grace learned to accept love, trust, and friendship in ways she had never allowed herself. Their connection became a shining example of how differences in background, wealth, and circumstance could be bridged by understanding, compassion, and shared purpose. And then, one day, an unexpected but joyful event occurred. Sophia received a letter from Grace's village. A young mother, inspired by Grace's programs, had safely delivered a baby with the help of the small clinic Sophia had funded. The child thrived, healthy and strong. Grace held the letter with tears in her eyes, her hands shaking. "Look, ma'am," she whispered. "Someone else's child is safe because of what we did. Because of your help and my dream, we saved a life." Sophia felt her heart swell with pride and gratitude. She had never imagined that a single moment, one night when Grace comforted Daniel, would lead to such a ripple of love and positive change. The unbelievable beginning had grown into a reality even more extraordinary than she could have hoped. Months turned into years, and the household continued to flourish. Daniel grew into a happy, confident child, surrounded by the love of two devoted mothers. Sophia continued to support Grace's programs, expanding their reach and impact. Grace's family thrived, no longer living in struggle, but in comfort and hope. The mansion that had once been a symbol of wealth alone had become a hub of care, kindness, and transformation. Sophia often reflected on the incredible journey they had taken. What had started as a shocking discovery, a maid nursing her baby, had blossomed into a story of empathy, understanding, and shared love. She realized that the true value of life was not in money, status, or power, but in the connections forged with others, in the courage to care, and in the willingness to help those who needed it most. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Sophia watched Grace gently rocking Daniel. She smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. Grace looked up at her and returned the smile, and in that moment, Sophia knew that life had given her a gift, far greater than wealth or success. She had been given the gift of love, empathy, and friendship, a bond that would endure for a lifetime. And so, the story that had begun with shock and disbelief reached its final beautiful chapter. The billionaire mother and the maid from a distant land had found each other, not just as caregiver and employer, but as mothers, friends, and partners in changing lives. The unbelievable act that had sparked it all had become the foundation of hope, transformation, and the true meaning of family. Sophia often whispered to herself, watching the peaceful household. Love had no boundaries, compassion had no limits, and sometimes the smallest acts could change the world in ways no one could ever imagine. And Grace, once a quiet maid, had become the heart and soul of a story that proved the most incredible truths often began in the simplest, most unexpected ways.